Hello and welcome back to another video. This is a video I have been very excited to film because I'm going to be sharing basically my favourite books of all time. So I really got into reading about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and since then I've probably read 6 series, I would say, that truly have blown me away. I'm still completely obsessed with them. I reread them way too many times and I just want everyone I know to read them. So I'm going to go over these series in the order that I read them. And the first one is a series that has completely changed my life, and that is Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. So Keeper of the Lost Cities is this middle grade to young adult fantasy book that basically follows 12-year-old Sophie, who in the first chapter or something of the book finds out she is an elf, and she is whisked away to this magical world called the Lost Cities where all the elves live. And in this world, mysteries keep popping up about why Sophie was living in the human world, and she has to adapt to this crazy new, seemingly magical life amongst the Lost Cities. And no one really knows why she was not living there in the first place, including Sophie. I think Sophie is a really great main character and role model for younger readers, but she's also realistically flawed. She can be impulsive, brash, and stubborn. She's very secretive and she doesn't really listen to people when they give her good advice, but her heart is always in the right place. At the end of the day, she's always making decisions that she wants to positively benefit people. It is a middle grade book, but the vocabulary is relatively easy, but not in a way that it's it says said a million times. I think Shannon's Messenger's writing is one of the most easy to read and listen to that I have ever encountered, because I initially consumed these books as audiobooks for the first 1 to 7, and I can confidently say it's probably the best audiobook I've ever listened to. It was narrated by someone, I think her name was Caitlin Kelly, if you're wondering. And I think it's really, really impressive how well she did all of the different characters' voices, including the male voices and the different species in this world. She really made them all sound unique, and whenever I read the books now, when new ones come out, it's her voices that I think of in my head as I read aloud. Another great thing about this world is that it does tackle some really interesting issues. So in the Lost Cities, we have this class system, basically, where you have the councillors, the emissaries, and the regents, who are all the nobility. And then if you are talentless and you don't have a special ability, then you are kind of looked down upon in society, as in there are certain jobs you can't do, there's certain education you can't do, people don't look at you right, and there's certain people you're not allowed to marry, otherwise you're labelled a bad match, which basically means the rest of society scorns you for the rest of your life because they don't think you should be marrying this person. Even though the wealth is the same, they're just more restricted, I suppose, and their freedom is something that they don't have as much control over. There's also lots of interspecies politics in this series, gnomes and ogres and goblins, and all these things could sound kind of childish, but they're done really well in this series. Each species has their own language and their traditions, their own cities, They have own personalities and customs, and it is really cool when you get to dive a bit deeper into all of them. It does only happen later in the series, but I think that's because they want you to be introduced to the elven world initially in the first couple books. Relationships are also really well explored here. The friendship dynamics are one of the best I've ever read, because each character has really different personalities, but they all come together in a really, really good way. And there is the smallest ever, small subplot of romance in this series, and it's the slowest burn you'll ever read, but when it is there, every fan loves it. It's completely clean though. Even the villains in this story are actually one of the most unique I've ever read about. Whilst we don't know their intentions, it's because they are presented as this mysterious, unknown organisation that we only find out more of when the characters do, because they're just as mysterious to us as they are to them, which means that as secrets are uncovered and mysteries unravelled, we find a lot more information and it hooks you into the series. And there are some really great plot twists and cliffhangers in this series. What's good about these villains, it means that the information is never info dumped, which can be really annoying to read in books because you want it to be thought out and shown rather than told, which I think this series does really, really well. especially considering Shannon Messenger is like a master of really, really subtle foreshadowing. There'll be events like in book 5 or something that have been hinted from book 2 or whatever that you're like, oh, I should have seen that coming. Especially considering it's a middle grade book. And you're like, oh, why didn't I see that coming? I should have known that and seen all the signs. And then it really is like, wow, what has just happened? So yeah, this series is incredible. But I would like you to bear in mind, it's not designed for teenagers or for young adults or adults. It is designed as a middle grade book. So you do have to bear that in mind when you're reading it. Don't go into it expecting a Sarah J. Maas book, because that's not what you're going to get. However, I know it's advertised for 8 to 12-year-olds. I don't really think an 8 or even 9-year-old should be reading this, because in the first book, some really dark things do happen. I think it can be a bit grim and scary for younger readers. So I think you'd have to be like double-digit age, 11, 12, 10, to be able to read this. I suppose it depends on the reader. One last note, this series is ongoing and has been since, I think the first book was published in 2012 or something. This is the graphic novel that was published recently, but I don't have book 1 with me, so this will have to do. If you're not into ongoing series, I think the last book may, by chance, be coming out this year, but honestly, I have no idea. However, if you're a slow reader, theoretically there's 9 books, but there's also 2 novellas and a graphic novel and some short stories. So there's a lot to keep you going for a while, if you don't mind waiting a little bit to find out what happens in the next book. Because it can be quite painful. I will warn you, it's very painful, her cliffhangers, especially the most recent one. Anyway, so yeah, this was the first book I have ever labelled top tier, and I will love it until I die, basically. Okay, for the next book, if you don't know it, you must be living under some kind of literary rock, because the next book is The Hunger Games. I don't have the first 3 with me, but I do have Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, so that's what I will be holding to display to you all. However, if you have been living under some kind of literary rock and you haven't heard of The Hunger Games or its plot, we are basically in this world called Panem, where we have 12 districts and the capital, and once a year, these 2 tributes, one male, one female, are selected from each district to fight to the death in this arena known as the Hunger Games for the capital's entertainment, as a punishment for this uprising rebellion that's hinted about that happened 80 years earlier or something. And we follow 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen, who volunteers for these Hunger Games to save her sister Prim, who was raped for them. To me, the reason I love The Hunger Games so much can be split into 3 main parts. The first is the high-stakes, really entertaining plot. The second is the characters that you really grow to love. And the third is the actual really, really impressive speculation that Suzanne Collins weaves into this book about modern day and the actual dystopian aspect of the series. So in regards to the first one, the plot, it's really impossible not to be on the edge of your seat when you're reading this series, because not only are kids fighting to the death, you have to worry about Katniss and you have to worry about her actually having to kill other people, which adds so much more stakes and adds so much more tension to the story. Also, her being worried about being killed and trying to survive the arena. She also has to make sure she doesn't die to any of the tricks that the capital puts into the arena, which makes it very tense, and it will definitely keep you hooked while you're reading it. Throughout all 3 books, honestly, even this one is really, really tense. The movies for this one, I think, are some of the best book-to-movie adaptations ever, and not that I haven't watched that many book-to-movie adaptations, but from the ones that I have, I can definitely tell that The Hunger Games did it really well. So even if you don't have the motivation to read these books, I would definitely recommend you watch the movies because they are just as great. The second thing I really love about this is the characters, which is really hard to explain why without spoiling who they are and what they mean to each other. But I can say multiple times throughout the trilogy I did find myself crying, so make of that what you will. And lastly, it's the dystopian premise of this book that is just completely mind-blowing and something I think upon initial reading you don't notice as much because you're just so entertained by the first 2. However, once you reread this, you really see just how masterful Suzanne Collins has done when she created this series. And that is, when you are reading this and you're really entertained the first time, you are basically just like the Capitol, watching the Hunger Games as tributes try to kill each other and being entertained and completely maybe unaware is the wrong word, but less bothered by the fact that children are literally being forced to kill each other. It's really gory and horrific, and it's something that, because we're entertained and we're just happy to consume and watch, means we kind of look past that. Also, how all the districts are being exploited and providing resources to the capital, meaning they are suffering and they are less developed, is completely reflective of modern society in the Western world and where we get our resources from, which I think is really well woven into the story. Not to mention, in this book, the whole debate about human nature. I won't go into this one as much because I still really enjoyed it, but it's not like what I consider my top tier. But in basic terms, this series has altered my brain chemistry, and I am so excited for Sunrise on the Reaping. I've pre-ordered the book, so I am hoping to get it on the day. Definitely recommend. So the next series that I don't have a physical copy of because I read all of them on Kindle, and that's probably for the best, because I feel like I would get some weird looks on my shelves, and that is Twilight. And it might be a bit controversial, I'm putting Twilight just as high on my list of favourite books as The Hunger Games or even Keeper of the Lost Cities, but let me explain. I don't think a book necessarily has to actually be good and well crafted for you to be completely obsessed with it, which is, to me, Twilight. I can tell objectively that the book hasn't been carefully plotted and thought about our world and had clever plot twists in it, but that doesn't make me any less obsessed when I was reading this series. It didn't stop me from being in school and being unable to stop thinking about Edward and Bella, because I just completely couldn't stop thinking about it. It would be like, oh, English, pay attention, pay attention. I wonder what's going to happen to them. Science, biology, note that down. Oh, but what if? Especially in like the second book, it's so... I just really, really wanted to know what happened next. In this book, there isn't really a plot per se, but we're basically just following the story of this girl named Bella, who has moved to this rainy, dreary, cloudy, rainy, dark, rainy, have I mentioned that it's really, really rainy, town called Forks, because her mother got remarried and her husband has to travel for work, which means that her mother wants to travel with her new husband, but because Bella needs a stable education, she can't travel, so she has to stay with Bella. And Bella feels guilty about this, so she moves in with her dad. The reason's slightly convoluted, but I feel like the reason isn't really the main point of the series. When she gets to Forks, she meets this strange boy named Edward Cullen and his brothers and sisters, who are all slightly secluded from society, but also described as like drop dead gorgeous, and she instantly basically develops a crush. This is a love at first sight romance situation, which normally can be quite annoying, and I think if I read this now I might find it annoying, but I ate it up when I read it first time. So how this series is so addicting, because my friend who read it and hated it still couldn't stop reading, and she ended up finishing the whole series. She still hated it, but she just also couldn't stop reading, which I think says a lot about the series in general. It comes down to it, this book is just another Not Like Other Girls YA love triangle angle, same difference. But I also think it paved the way for lots of other YA books, because I think Twilight was published in like 2005 or something like that. And since then we had the dystopian era, the paranormal romance era, the YA fantasy era, and we've discovered so many incredible genres since then and had such incredible work put out after the success of Twilight, and I do respect it for that. I'm not necessarily saying that the other books copied Twilight at all, just that Twilight showed that teenagers are an audience that can be marketed towards, which I think is really, really good for the YA genre. Speaking of books targeted to the YA genre, the next series is probably one of the first like fantasy romance series that I read and became completely obsessed with, and that is The Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas. I would just like to say this series has some of my all-time favourite book covers. Like, they're really, really simple. I can tell there's nothing like really too fancy about them, but I love them so much. I think they're probably some of the best out of all of my top tier book covers. Maybe I love the Keeper of the Lost Cities ones, but that might just be nostalgia talking. So, The Throne of Glass is this young adult fantasy romance series that's 8 books long and probably quite well known for its really confusing reading order. I started with The Assassin's Blade, and I'm really happy I did, because I think if you want to really enjoy all the plot twists and stay in this series for the long haul, it's really important you read this one first. However, if you're just looking for a one-off book, then it's probably fine if you only read Throne of Glass and then stop, because if you read this book in any other order, you completely spoil the plot twists and the surprising things that you find out in this book. Because if this series was in chronological order, this would be book 1, because Throne of Glass is set afterwards. This series is really hard to give a premise to, because the plot of book 1 is really different to the plot of book 3, which is completely different to the plot of book 7. However, the main plot in the first one is that we are following this assassin, Celaena Sardothien, who works for this underground, creepy organisation run by her master, Arobynn Hamel. I may pronounce many of these names wrong. I'd like to warn you right now. This is just how I did it. One of the best parts about this series is definitely the plot twists, because this series is written in third person, which means our main character can be secretive without all the secrets being spoiled for us. So when the other characters are really surprised by something she says, we can be just as surprised as they are. There are so many times my jaw just hit the floor at something Celaena said. And there are so many moments where I'm like, how did I not see the signs? Like that line in Exile, you never gave a warning sign, and Celaena's like, I gave so many signs. This book does have multiple perspectives, or the entire series does. I don't know if this one does, actually. But anyway, it does have multi-perspective, and I'm really annoyed at myself because I don't think I really put in the effort to enjoy the other perspectives as much as I did Celaena's, because her perspective was the reason I love the series so much. And there's one more that I enjoy that's mostly just in book 7. However, most people do really enjoy the other perspectives. It was just me, I suppose, who find them a bit boring because I didn't try to be invested in them. Because I have to keep in mind this is a fantasy series primarily, which means I do have to pay attention to the world building and the plot and all other characters' subplots, because they come into play later. Sarah J. Maas isn't exactly known for her world building and her complicated magic systems, but she is known for her really great relationships and the adventures that happen, which I think is the reason this book is so incredible. And in this series, it worked incredibly well. You can probably see here the next one is the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. Here is technically the first book, but I prefer this one more, so I'm going to hold this one up. To me, this series is basically just a romance set in a beautiful fantasy world, and that's not to say I don't enjoy the fantasy and the adventures and the actual plot of it. I just think the romance is the reason I and so many others are drawn into it. I specifically love the first 3 in the series, and then the 4th and the novella were kind of just like, I still enjoyed them, but they're not top tier, they're not the reason I love the series. And in terms of the romance, the tropes are, you can skip ahead if you can't, this is a spoiler. A, enemies to lovers, probably what it's known as. B, the one that I love most about it is this is a really acts of service kind of relationship. C, we have found family, which is also a really great one. And D, fated mates, which is a big deal in the series, but I also think that it's not really like a game changer. For example, if you don't like fated mates, the said fated mates still show real reasons why they care and for each other and love each other. And these became some of my favourite tropes ever because of this series, and those tropes aren't the reason I love this series, it's the other way around. Sarah J. Maas uses them so well to create tension, to create really deep bonds between characters and us as the reader. It makes me just want to go over and annotate this book just to highlight every single time our love interest just proves what a caring... is person the right word? I'll get to that in a second. Person he is. And every time they just prove how sweet they are. I think I would eventually run out of tabs if I was doing that. However, if you, like most people, and like me, want to know more from a book than just its tropes, in this book we start out with our main character, Feyre, who is hunting in the woods because she's basically been the sole provider for her family for the past 5 years or something, because her sisters are useless brats and her father is a depressed parasite. This may be slightly biased, because I know some people like the sisters. But come on, who lets their 14-year-old sister be their sole provider of food in the dangerous woods? Anyway, what happens is she sees this wolf in the woods and it's going after a deer that she desperately needs to kill because it could provide food for a long time for her family. And so she kills both and then finds out that the wolf was actually this fae creature. And fae are these immortal, feared creatures that live beyond the wall that separates their magical fae lands and the human land. And the price for killing a fae in the treaty is either death or being taken prisoner for the rest of her life to the fae lands. And fae, were given her actual small amount of survival instincts, obviously chooses the latter. And so that's where the plot really unfolds. This is kind of a vibes series. The plot is there, but it's not as much of a big deal. The romance is really what makes people addicted to it, and the emotions you'll feel when you read this are nothing else is like on par to any of this. So the most recent ones have been very, very popular series, and I think this just proves series are popular for a reason and well loved for a reason, because it is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. It is the spectacular romantasy series that basically took the internet by storm in 2023. I actually only read it in 2024, but that's besides the point. I think that the fact that the most recent book in this series was published about a month ago now already has like 690,000 ratings with like 4.31 average. That is incredible Goodreads data if you don't really know the app that well. Even the first book, I think it has like over 2 million ratings and a 4.5 something average, which is actually jaw-dropping. There are not many books you'll find on Goodreads that have a rating that high with that many people having read it. This series is completely addicting, and not just because of the cruel cliffhangers Yarros leaves us with at the end of every single book, but also the really, really fun, cool plot that we experience. And so, in the first book, we're following 20-year-old Violet Sorrengail, who, by the order of her mother, the General, is being forced to start at Basgiath War College, where she is going to be trained to ride dragons in the war. That is basically against this other kingdom called like Poromiel or something. I might get that wrong. However, the thing about the academy is that basically you graduate or you die. Not only do you have to worry about the huge scary dragons trying to kill you, but also your coursework is trying to kill you, and the other students are allowed and are trying to kill you. It is literally a rule that the other students can kill you whenever they like, basically as long as you're not sleeping, because that's where they draw the line. Now, Violet never wanted to be a dragon rider. She trained all her life to be a scribe, because she more wanted to record and learn about the battles than actively partake in them. However, her mother clearly had a problem with this. Not only that, but Violet's at a significant disadvantage because she has this like long-term illness or something that means her joints and bones are constantly popping in and out and cracking, which means she's kind of frail, which is a terrible thing to be, where people will kill you if they think you're a weakness to the wing. To make matters worse, and putting Violet in even more danger, we have this man called Xaden Ryasorn, who is the son of the leader of the previous rebellion that was taken down, and Violet's mother executed his father, so he is out to kill her, which he basically can at any moment. It's actually a miracle that Violet survives. If you consider that a spoiler, just think, why would the series be so popular if she died in the first chapter of the book? All that scary death and plot stuff aside, I did call this romantasy because the romance is really, really great, and this series is an excellent example of enemies to lovers done well. And Yarros is really, really great at creating tension between characters without it being like annoying and having stupid miscommunications and third act conflicts that just make you want to ram your head into a wall. And that is all of my top tier books. I don't know if I'll honestly ever find another one, which is kind of sad, because every time I find a top tier one, I'm like, surely nothing can get better than all these ones I've already read. But who knows? I've been really considering adding the Poppy War to this list, but I'm deciding, I think I'm going to reread it and then decide, because that will be a big indicator on whether I want to add it. Because if it's a top tier, like truly, truly top tier book, then I would rather reread that book than read new books, basically, which can be a bit of a problem sometimes. So thank you for watching the video. Please let me know if you liked any of these books, what you thought of them, what your all-time favourite books are. Please subscribe, like and turn your notifications on, and I'll see you in the next video.